You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is May 25th, 2023, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Chase Oliver, and he is a candidate for the 2024 Libertarian Party nomination for U.S. President. We recently interviewed him on another show to really dive into his campaign and what's going on there and how he came around to liberty. Now, this show, we're actually going to get into a lot of the topics, get a little more detail on different issues that our president's going to have to deal with. But before we do that, let me introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. My name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host. And Chase is on our upper right-hand corner this time. Okay, so let's jump right. Well, before we jump into the interview, real quick, let me pull up Chase's page real quick. Leon, can you pull that up real quick so people can see exactly? So if you want to go find out more, if you don't have time to stay to the end of the show or whatever, it's votechaseoliver.com, and you can find out more about Chase and his campaign and a lot of the different issues, what his positions are on those as well. He goes into some of the things that are important to him there. So let's jump into the topics. One of the first topics, it's probably the most important topic to us on the show, is education. We just feel like it's kind of like an indoctrination mill against liberty. It feels like, because
Jason, I don't think it feels like. I think it is.
Yeah. Well, and so maybe Leon, maybe you could pull up the first story. So obviously, we saw this front and center during the pandemic that clearly kids weren't the top priority at that time, and now we're starting to see that kids are taking some hits. But that's just what we saw from the status quo. I mean, I really think the system is really selling kids short, just in general too. We do see though that there's been some benefits in a push towards school choice. That's gaining a little bit of ground as well because of this whole thing. And Hoover Institute actually has kind of a nice map out there about school choice and what some of the different states have to offer on that. So anyways, let me kick this issue of education to you guys. Chase, what do you think on school choice, or just education in general? What are your thoughts on that, and how would you address this as president?
So let's frame it what you were saying about COVID, right? I often tell people that in every storm cloud, there's a silver lining. Silver linings is that the American public and parents across America got to see the failure that was the public school structure in their home via Zoom during the pandemic. And they saw how public schools were not ready to address the issue of the pandemic. And it caused kids to suffer, and it caused parents to look elsewhere. And so the pandemic was terrible. You do have to look at the few things that created positivity out of that. And one of those is the increased support for alternatives to the public school model. I support as president eliminating the Department of Education, returning that funding back to the states, and allowing education to hopefully get as localized and decentralized as possible. And within that, the reasons for that, we always hear about how this helps parents and students, right? It gives parents more control. It gives students more choice and more avenues for success, less cracks to fall through than the one-size-fits-all public school model. We don't often talk about is how great this is for teachers, how there are thousands and thousands of teachers across this country who mean well, who want to educate kids, who want to do their best to make sure that we have a next generation of bright young learners, but are stuck within the model of the public school system. They know they can teach better than what the curriculum says. They know there are better ways to break through and get through to their students and turn them into critical thinkers long term. But because of the way we've structured schools, they're not able to do that. And so when I talk about freeing up education, I don't just talk about it as a good thing for parents and students, which it is. I also educators. And to that end, I support the idea that if you're going to spend taxpayer money on education, it should be funding the students themselves and not necessarily a system made up of a government structure and administrators. So I support school choice bills. Ideally, I would like to get to a point where there is no public money and no, like there's no traditional public school structure, that we just have a marketplace of education. But that's going to take time. And ultimately, creating school choice as an avenue helps parents, particularly homeschool and unschooling parents who want to teach even outside of the private school structure.
So if I understand what you just said, Chase, you are saying that if we want no public funds in education, that means every parent will have to fund their kids' education at whatever at their means, at the level of their means. That's what you're saying, right?
So that's the minarchist ideal, but really what I think is possible is for us to actually just no longer have a public school model, to have a full school choice model that is funded by the taxpayer. I think that's where we're at as a country right now. And in doing so, you create a marketplace of education so that over time you can wean that system off of the public dollar. But really, ultimately, what we want to create as much marketplace competition as possible. And like I said, so if we're going to fund education using taxpayer money, which friends at different levels can debate that or not, but if we're going to be using any taxpayer money, it should be funding the students directly and not the school systems, which is what we're currently doing, which allows us to have these bloated mass bureaucracies in terms of school boards and administrators, as opposed to money going to teachers and into the classroom.
I mean, I certainly agree. I certainly agree with you in terms of funding students and not systems. I totally agree with that. But do you see that, even that, I mean, the funding of students and not system, do you see even that as some violation of libertarian principles?
Oh yeah, by no means is that what I would call the minarchist ideal of where I stand. But I would say that's how you start the transition over there. Once you have a marketplace in education, then the conversation gets to, well, how can we reduce the amount of taxation that goes into that marketplace? And as you reduce that, you're going to see people like charity organizations, scholarship organizations, grants. These are things that are going to be starting to give into students. And you really start that at the highest levels, the 12th graders, the high school level, and you start peeling that back towards where you get to primary education. But ultimately, I think we need to have as many avenues to options outside of the public schools exist currently. And you're seeing legislation, I think it's like 35 or 40 states already that's moving the needle towards more choice in education. And we don't need to stop, stand in that way. I want to just say in Georgia, right, Republicans talk a good game, but 2 years ago, they stalled their school choice bill. Some flyers got sent to their fledgling members. And so they didn't enact more school choice. They didn't increase the amount of money that goes towards education. So, and towards outside of the public school system model. And that was because, and this was 2 years ago, that was because the speaker at the time was a little offended. He's no longer the speaker anymore. Unfortunately, he passed away, actually. May he rest in peace. I don't want to speak ill of the dead. But now it seems like school choice is like back on the menu for our legislature. And we need to support those ideas that increase liberty.
One of the things I really like that I heard you say too is it's about convincing the teachers too that there's something there in it for them as well, because one of the things that we constantly hear is this lament that, well, my gosh, a basketball player makes X million dollars and a teacher only makes so much money. But part of the reason for that is because it's not a competitive market, and that teacher is locked into an audience of 25 or 30 students versus that basketball player is locked into a much larger audience. So by freeing up the system and letting people play with this, I mean, you could have some $1 million earners as teachers in the future if people are allowed to experiment. And maybe that's part of the carrot that has to be held out here. I don't know.
I know for a fact post-COVID there are a lot of teachers who are making a lot more money by teaching pod education, by being a private educator for 5 or 6 families, as opposed to being a public school teacher. They're making more money and having more freedom to do that right now. So yeah, there's nothing that says in a truly competitive marketplace that teachers won't prosper. And again, not just in prosper in the dollars, but in prosper in being able to teach in a way that they know is effective, towards educating young minds and not just preparing them to be like the next line of factory workers, right?
Yes.
Automatons. We want critical thinkers. We want people who are going to be looking at the world and trying to find solutions and not just merely like, hey, how can I be a cog in the machine? New machines and better machines that operate, with less, with less energy and more productivity, right? Like we want to prosper, and to do that, we have to have an educated generation. And right now,
Yes.
COVID has put a major hit on so many young people, and we can do better.
Well, this is a good segue.
And that to me is one of the great failures in the public schools right now, is that we are not producing from the public schools. We are not producing critical thinkers. People are not being indoctrinated in all sorts of left-wing ideas, as far as I can tell. Well, that is a big problem. That's a big problem. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And here's the other thing that a marketplace of education creates. We need to also reject the idea that right-wing indoctrination needs to be happening in this country.
Good point.
That pendulum can swing very easily the other way, and the way we fix that is we remove the dollar incentive and the ability for government to weed its way in there by creating a marketplace. Hey, if you want to go to a school that has more of a left-wing bent, cool, put your money there. If you want to have a school that has a little bit more of a right-wing bent, and that'll be solved in the free marketplace and the free exchange of ideas, as opposed to requiring that government require that one ideology or another be taught. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot when it comes to like culture war issues, for instance, right? I talk about the need for a cultural ceasefire, that libertarians are the only ones who oppose war at every level. We oppose actual wars, we oppose drug wars, and we should oppose culture wars, because at the end of the day, the culture war is two sides saying, government needs to enforce my way of life, or the government needs to enforce my way of life. And we as libertarians say, no, we can just live our lives as free exchange of ideas and culture. And, may the best one kind of flourish like anything else happens in a marketplace. And so long as violence isn't being used to push one or the other, cool. Everyone can live in peace as their own selves. We're the only political philosophy that can be that arbiter of peace. And so it's more important now than ever in voice in our elections, and particularly at the presidential level.
Yeah, it really feels like we're so divided now that we are the only antidote, as far as, pull that government back, don't force things on people. But, this is a good segue to the next topic, too, because we've sort of waded into it. But identity politics, which sort of gets into that culture war, but it's also tied a little bit to our education system. And Leon, could you bring up the visual on this? So one of the craziest things that we've seen with education is that they're literally trying to, I guess they're not liking the results they're seeing in some aspects, and so then they're changing the essentially the objective standards we think we put in, and they're saying, no, we'd kind of like to fiddle with this stuff at the end, based upon either ethnicity or other characteristics that are, maybe not so objective. And so in
that would have nothing to do with your productivity as a human being. Go ahead, Jason.
Sure. And but it's not just education. I mean, we certainly see this with the University of California sort of been leading the nation in this bad way of pulling out objective metrics, I guess, of things like the SAT test and others. By the way, it's kind of weird because they're claiming that these are culturally biased, yet foreign students seem to do pretty darn well on these things against us, which is kind of a statement that, well, how biased could they be? But on another,
I was one of those students, Jason. If you know that.
Okay.
So let's talk about, like, as you said, identity politics here, and particularly what you said there with college admissions, right? Or with the objective measuring of, right? I don't think that it's necessarily wrong to say, hey, maybe this isn't the best way to measure something, this particular test. But I also don't think that the best way to solve that is to be like, well, let's throw immutable characteristics into the mix, because that, as you said, does not have any real bearing on, how student, how well you're going to be your aptitude for whatever particular course of study you're looking to join. Those things really shouldn't matter. And I do believe in, if there's ways to expand upon how we choose students beyond just the SATs, because, the SATs, I guarantee you, are not the best way to measure the aptitude of a student. But if you want to improve upon that, you can do that without like going, okay, well, we have to fit this certain quota, or we have to do this, or we have to abide by this, or we have to change the standards for different people. I think that's kind of a little wrong to do. And I say this as, somebody who is I'm LGBT, so I am a group in this country that would probably get a slot in said quota system. But I just don't think that that's maybe the best way to go about that kind of stuff. I think, again, if you want to improve about how we pick college students, by all means do it, but that's not the way to do it. And as far as identity politics, I think far too often government and the people who are in power, the duopoly, seek to use our personal identities and the things that make us different from one another as ways to create conflict with each other. And I'm somebody who is actually glad that I live in an extremely diverse world in terms of diversity of thought, in terms of diversity of culture and faith, all those things that make us the wonderful melting pot that the United States is. I actually love that kind of stuff. And I don't seek to use those characteristics to create division. I think actually it's our diversity that brings us together as a people, that every person is individually different. We're not a bunch of lemmings, right? Like, and no two people are exactly the same. And that's what makes humanity great. That's what makes living worth living, is the diversity of life. And I just want to say, like, I don't understand people who seek to use differences of identity as a cudgel against other people. And that goes, I believe that kind of collectivized hate or, bigotry is just really wrong to do to people. And it's antithetical to liberty. And so I believe, in true market equality for people. And that also goes across, and that means also we need to step up and speak out as libertarians when there are structures within government that affect people more than others. When there is systemic problems in courts and when you can statistically see that stuff, and die to it, but we also can't be like, well, the way to fix it is to be punishing this people more so that it's all equal. No, the way to look at it is to go, okay, what is going wrong here? Why are there statistical anomalies with what's going on? And how can we adjust these things? And how can we address these issues without making it about identity politics? You can take the emotion out of it. Be more logical. Be more, I'm a Trekkie. Be more like Spock. Be more logical.
Yeah. Just don't work for a giant federation, but be more like Spock.
I know this is not the show to do this. Yeah, this is not the show to do this, but I could go into a whole dissertation about how Star Trek is not communism. About how,
is not really?
Yeah, you believe it or not, and about how long story short, both. First off, okay, I'll do it real quick. Star Trek is a television show that is made in our world and has made tons and tons of money for people and corporations in the free market. So it itself is not communist, but the world that it exists in, the world of Captain Kirk, would never have come about if the guy, and this is in a movie, the guy who developed the whole warp, the reason why he did it is because he wanted to get rich and retire on an island with beautiful women. And so the profit motive is what made the whole universe even come about. And so both in and outside of the real world of Star Trek, it's all capitalism, baby. And so you're welcome.
Chase, I think we'll have to have you back to discuss that, because I think you got a problem with your logic right on that.
Well, and this is on the identity politics of Vulcans too. So
hey, me and Justin Amash both love Star Trek, and I'm sure as libertarians we can both make the case for why libertarians should enjoy it. It's also too, so there's that. It's a post-scarcity economy. Anyway, back to the serious.
I love Star Trek too. Don't get me wrong. I love Star Trek, even back in the classic one, all that. I love it. I love to watch it. I still watch it sometimes. But no, I think we'll disagree on whether that was communism or not.
There's my Star Trek mouse pad.
Okay. Well, I think you've got a lock on the Trekkie vote at this point.
But getting back to what we're talking about here, like that we need to have a little bit more logic when it comes to these things, and we need to quit like using each other's identities as weapons against one another. I think that's what's created so much division, so much hyperpartisanship in this country. And the powers that be love to use our identity. In 2004, it was gay marriage that was used as the big wedge issue to get Republicans out to vote. I think now you're seeing that right in terms of trans issues. Act like it's like the biggest issue in the entire world. Like, oh my God, trans everything. There are 1.2 million trans adults in this country, in a nation of almost 400 million people. The fact that they're continuing to talk about them in particular tells me that there's other stuff going on that the people in power want to distract you from paying attention to. And so I would urge you to reject arguments about beer cans and the debt crisis, all the curtails of liberty when it comes to the security state. Focus on that and not on personal identity. This is part of the cultural, ceasefire that I talked about earlier. Let's focus on the real important.
Chase, I have no problem. With trans people adults trying to live their lives as they choose. Okay, I have no problem at all with that. But I have a real problem when this thing start to go, when children are being taught trans issues, when they are trying to tell children that they could be a boy or they could be a girl when they are not. I have a real problem with that.
And so
I cannot see how that.
So we might have a difference of opinion on this, but I can say, I'm 37, 20 years in school. I was in high school with a trans man. It's not a new thing. It's newly noticed. And I would say it's talked about more. And I think in regards to schools, we need to have school choice. You can pick whatever school how's going to teach whatever. That's the immediate way to solve that problem with schools. People can choose that stuff and the marketplace will react how it's going to. But when it comes to the fact that trans young people do exist, gender dysphoria does exist in young people. And the way we have to approach it, just like so many things in life, has to be done on a case-by-case basis. Are there parents who are trying to push this stuff on their kids? Yes, I would argue that probably exists in the world. Do I think that that's most parents of trans kids? No, of them. And I know that they are just trying to help their kids and try to navigate this very complicated world. And they just want to see that their kids happy and healthy. And they didn't ask for it either. That's the other thing that you're going to hear when you talk to parents of trans young people. They did not ask for gender dysphoria in their kids. All they're trying to do is do what's best for them. And I think that the best mechanism for that is not regulation by the state. The best mechanism for that is for doctors to have a say-so and for other experts to be working with parents to find the best course of treatment. And that does not mean surgeries, by the way. Surgeries are almost non-existent for people under 18. But I would say the same thing if I were a parent and my kid wanted a surgery. The same thing that if my kid came to me and asked for a nose job, I would say, maybe wait till you're an adult to make that decision and don't have me make that decision for you. Like, you need to wait till you're legally able to make that decision. But with regards to other course of treatment for young people, that has to be done on a case-by-case treatment. And I'm certainly not a doctor, and neither are the people who sit on government boards, and neither are most members of Congress. And so they're not the people I trust. It's going to have to be medical experts that I trust, certainly if I had kids and with my nephews and nieces. But that doesn't mean that schools have been approaching it as also the best way either. I do think there's actually a middle ground there that so many sides, because of our hyperpartisan nature of our politics, refuses to see that middle ground exists. And I think we as libertarians need to be speaking out for so many things, not just on this issue, but on so many issues that things need to be taken on a case-by-case basis. It's what minimums for justice reform. Because when you have mandatory minimums, you take that power out of the hands of a judge who is, nominally supposed to be educated on these topics and know what this is about, to be able to make that judgment decision for, okay, this person committed this crime, but they've never committed another crime before. It happened because of this situation, so I'm going to reduce the sentence. Or this person is a habitual person who continuously does the crime and they have no remorse for it. I'm going to give them the maximum sentence. Those kinds of case-by-case thinking That needs to happen all the way in our politics, and not just about any one issue or another. That happens across it. And so much of the hyperpartisanship we have is us refusing to address by case basis, and that's kind of where I stand on all those issues, but in particular,
Leon, let me jump in, because otherwise we're not going to have time for the other topics too. But no, with it, just to nail it down though, one thing I really liked that you said is that, hey, you get government out of a lot of this, a lot of these problems will get a lot smaller, and whether that's school choice or whatever. But one of the things that government can't seem to stay out of is our privacy, and it's just all over now. The fact that it is jumping into our social media, trying to regulate what we're saying there. It is. Oh, Leon, can you bring back up the visual there, because we were just looking at here. This is an article about the Twitter files, and that's Matt Taibbi and Schellenberger both testifying in front of Congress about that. And of course, we even saw when you said in another show, I believe it was our other show, that you'd get rid of Department of Homeland Security. I mean, that literally was what they were trying to put a Ministry of Truth in, the idea that they were going to have somebody who would tell us what was true and what wasn't true out there online, which is just absolutely obscene. Well, I mean, they were trying to do it overtly. It got killed there, but apparently they were doing it covertly by going around the back door to a lot of this social media. So what do you think about that, Chase? And what would you do about it to try and rein in the government's, I guess, invasion of our privacy and attack on our free speech?
Yeah, well, in terms of invasion on privacy, like, it's nothing new. It's been going on for, my entire life and then some. This really got turned up on steroids post 9/11 with the Patriot Act. And the ability, for the NSA to just collect metadata on every single person, everything they do. These kinds of things were never really pushed back against, because we were kind of in the panic of 9/11. We're clear-eyed now, and we understand that these things are major abuses going on. And we've had giant whistleblowers kind of telling the story of how our information is being used against us. Now, if you own a private social media platform, hey, if you're Donald Trump and you own Truth Social, you can ban whoever you want, and you can stop whoever you want from on your platform. That's your prerogative. If you lose money on it, well, that's what happens to you when you limit your customer base. But I am totally against the powers of government trying to push those levers, or pull those levers rather, and try to control the information that exists online. I think it's very dangerous. And I think when you see things like Ministry of Truth, like Orwellian is like just the base adjective you would use for that, right? Of what that is. And we need to push back against that. And again, having a libertarian presidential candidate is so that we can push those ideas into the conversation and hopefully get some pushback. And here's the deal. If we're to not win, but every idea that we had gets more and more traction and we see more and more freedom from that, that's a win in my book. But really, I got kind of started doing this to oppose the growth of government post 9/11. And part of that was the national security state that curtails our privacy and keeps us under all the time. I just oppose such things on its face as being antithetical to liberty. And, I see a real dark day forward if we continue this. And again, this isn't just a left-wing issue. Like, the Democrats are doing it right now, but you bet yourself, like, if Republicans were in power in 2024, the Ron DeSantis or the Donald Trumps of the world are power of government to clamp down on their information. I know they say they're not going to. Oh, it's so bad what the Democrats are doing. But then every time they get in office, they do exactly what Democrats do. Just like they were like, oh, the spending is so bad under Democrats. And then Donald Trump went and exploded the debt. So they will say what they want to say to get elected. But when they do and they get that power in their hands, it's like the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings. Like, they just can't be controlled by it and overwhelmed by it. Well, that's what's going to happen. This is why you have to start electing libertarians at the local, state, and national level, because we're the only political party that's going to stand firm against those kinds of abuses and really uncover them. And like I said, if I'm elected on day one, we're pardoning Snowden, we're pardoning Assange, we're pardoning these people who let us know about the abuse. And if I'm elected president, right, my White House would be the most open to whistleblowers, period. If there's things that need to be, if there's whistles that need to be blown, do it. My administration will not punish you. And reveal all the bad things that all the people who are doing so I can fire them and get rid of them.
Real quick, and jumping in on that whole analogy to Lord of the Rings, I feel like the Libertarian Party is the Shire, because that's the only place you're going to find somebody you can trust that ring of power with.
Well, it just makes me want to become a homesteader, right? Just live on my farm and try to separate myself out as much as possible. But unfortunately, if we do that, if we ignore the evils of the world, everything just becomes. Sometimes we got to step out of the Shire and we got to grab the ring and toss it in the flames, because that's what I'm seeking to do. I want to take the power away from the powerful, the people who have seized that power, and give it back to each and every one of us, to our individual sovereignty. And so, libertarian, and I could kind of go find my own little piece of land and just homestead and grow my crops and live alone, away from all this as much as possible. But eventually, it would come to get you. And so, we got to do the hard work of stopping our liberty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leon, if you didn't have anything to say, I was going to jump on to the next thing real quick. Did you want to jump in real quick, or?
No, well, it's just the whole issue here we're talking about is how power corrupts. Okay, and I mean, Chase kind of answered this previously, but do you believe that libertarians can really resist the corruption of the corrupting power of having that power, that thing in your hand? Do you believe libertarians can resist that desire?
I like to think that we can, and at the very least, we can do it better than most in terms, of that stuff. Like, I'm not going to pretend to say that if we all of a sudden just got all the power, there wouldn't be some people who would be like, "Ooh, it's so shiny," and like go for it. But I like to think that I'm somebody who would stick to my word. I don't seek to wield a lot of power, and I know that sounds crazy when I say I'm running for president, but I'm really seeking to just give it away back to individuals, right? If I were to be, and it sounds crazy, right? If I were elected president, I'd become the most powerful man in the world, the free world, right? But immediately, I would start reducing my power, because that's frankly, the office of the president of the United States becomes so powerful that no one person can really truly wield all that power with open honesty. And effectively, it's just such a huge thing. Like, you can't keep your eyes on every single thing. So then you're relying on the government structures that exist underneath you, which by their very nature are corrupted. And so, even the best of intentions, you're going to be running into a lot that's coming out of Washington, D.C. And so, you have to be prepared to get dirty, man. Like, I ain't afraid to get dirty. I ain't afraid to have to deal with the BS and have to get, but ultimately it'll be better for each and every person. And if I can, help the world be a little bit more free, it's worth all of it. It's worth the muck and the mire.
Well, I'm going to segue that into two issues that I wanted to meld together here. One is the future of our dollar. I mean, one, we've done a terrible job of putting ourselves into debt, but we also have a lot of talk now that the way out of it somehow is a digital currency, which also kind of has all these privacy implications to it too. So this idea of a digital dollar in Europe, they're actually really starting to make some headway towards moving towards that digital euro, I guess. But there's some talk here in the United States as well about that. But just to give our viewers a sense of where we're at with how bad of a job we've done with our debt, the national debt. Let me see here. I had a.
Isn't there debtclock.org? You can see the actual clock.
Yeah. No, that's one place. I had a. Oh, here we go. This is. Here it is. This is the debt. This is the. From the treasury.gov. And so this just shows the debt over time, just the raw debt. And then here's another visual too, to get a sense over time what that is with respect to the economy. This is from the CBO, our Congressional Budget Office, and it shows, way back in 1900, the amount of, this is debt to GDP. So that's essentially the productivity of our country. It was a tiny fraction of the productivity is how much we owed. Then World War II comes around and it goes really high, but we managed to become productive and get out of it. Now the CBO is projecting we're going off into the stratosphere. So this should scare the hell out of everybody. I mean, this is bad news. And of course, the GDP is sort of flattening out too, which shows that even in that other story that we were just saying, yeah, we need the GDP to keep rising. Otherwise, that curve is going to get a lot more steep that we were just looking at. And of course, inflation is rocking us right now too. So, Chase, it's the ship feels like it's sinking. What does Captain Chase do about this?
So first, you mentioned CBDCs. I oppose them with every fiber of my being. I support alternatives to fiat currency like Bitcoin and others, but not doing that through a central bank. I think that's actually antithetical to the whole idea of digital currencies, to have it through one centralized bank in the United States. And also there's the implication that, CBDCs, if that's what we switch to, we don't use fiat cash anymore, they can turn that off. They can turn it off. And so you become a dissident in government. Government doesn't like what you're doing. There's a world where they can just turn off your wealth and completely cut you off. And so we don't want that. I know it sounds weird to have to explain that, but we don't want that kind of dystopian conditions to exist. And so, I absolutely oppose CBDCs, support the alternative like Bitcoin. I also support, collecting things like gold through actual commodities that have, a standard price. That's not a terrible idea either. And then as far as like our debt crisis, what we're going through, this is one of the reasons why I want to be running for president, because we provide a generational contrast when we have a candidate who's a millennial for president, because it's my generation and the generations that follow me that are going to have that bubble when it bursts. And I have to deal with the hyperinflation that's going to come with it if we don't start addressing it now. So it's really important for us to be speaking this message to young voters now, that if you want to have a future with any kind of services from government, any kind of structure, you have to start cutting right now, because otherwise we're going to be in a really bad place. And the people in power, these people who are 80 years old, they don't care. They really don't care about this stuff, because they're honestly not going to be around to see it, come to fruition. They only care about their power structures and maintaining till the next 2-year election cycle. And so we have to start talking generationally about ways to reduce the size and scope of government so that we can reduce the debt ratio and actually start paying down the debt. And that starts with balancing a budget, right? We haven't had one of those in the last 23 years, right? So let's start getting back to even that bare practice. I said in my debate with Raphael Warnock, why is a balanced budget a radical idea and not a rational idea in this country anymore? And why can't we go back to the idea of like, hey, we need to pay, spend less than we take in. Like, why is that a radical idea? Why is that crazy? It's what every single person has to do at the end of their month, or else they run a debt up and they get into a crisis. We don't want to have that as a nation. And so we need to be returning back to sound fiscal principles. And I know it sounds weird to be coming out of a young person's mouth to say we need to get back to at least the balanced budgets of 23 years ago. But we do. And the way you get to that, by the way, is not by raising taxes. There's no way at this point, because they have messed it up so bad that there's literally mathematically no way at this point to be able to revenue ourselves out of this crisis. It's only now a spending issue. We have to reduce the amount of spending, because if we don't, any kind of revenue generation we're going to do to even get anywhere near paying down the debt is going to cause so much of a stagnant in productivity that we're never going to grow ourselves out of where we need to grow out of. And we're going to be stuck with negative growth and recession and depression. So we're not going to be able to tax our way out of this problem. Sorry, Democrats. You messed that up 23 years ago and then some. And then sorry, Republicans, this idea that we're going to cut things from 5% to 2% and call that a cut, that's not going to fly any. We have to be really serious about it. And people say all the time, oh, will that create a shock? Yeah, it'll create a shock. The longer we wait, the larger the shock. But Milton Friedman said it best when he said, it creates a shock when you take the bottle out of the drunk's hand, but that eventually he and then his body heals. We need to take the booze out of the hands of these drunkards who are taxing or spending ourselves into oblivion, and let our body, that is our economy, heal over time.
Yes, indeed. Your fear about central bank digital currency is well-founded, very well-founded, because if you look at what happened in Canada, which supposedly is supposed to be one of the freest countries in the world, look at what Justin Trudeau tried to do to the truckers when they were protesting some of the COVID restrictions that he imposed. I mean, look at what happened. And this is supposedly in one of the freest countries of the world. This was really
And just
astonishing.
for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Trudeau essentially shut down their ability to be funded so that they could
Yes,
speak, so that they essentially they wanted to protest, and he shut down their speech by shutting down their money. So
yes,
this makes it even easier because they didn't have a CBDC there. So,
exactly. Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Well,
Well, and then, did you want to say anything more, Chase? Or
no, I was
jump
just
to the next one?
we're talking about a lot of things. So if we want to kind of move on to the next
Yes.
thing, I'm happy to talk about it.
Awesome. So the next thing that President Chase would have to face is some of these issues with the environment and energy, and we've seen a massive contrast between the last two administrations. Trump was kind of a drill baby drill, and the Biden was kind of plug up all the all the wells sort of guy. You know, it was his first thing in office was to shut down the Keystone Pipeline. So and certainly there was a lot of efforts he made too in shutting down a lot of ability to drill, and he sent a lot of signals to a lot of the oil companies that, hey, look, this is not a thing of the future. So but anyways, this is clearly a big issue going into the future. We've seen gas prices spike, and the question is, you know, does a lot of this stuff make sense? Certainly there's a tie into climate change, and certainly some people believe that's a big issue. To me, though, it does seem a little bit odd that, like in this case, President Biden kind of shut down our own oil production and then asked for oil from foreign countries, which seems
Yes.
a little bit odd here. You're just giving a fist bump to you know, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So, anyways, what do you think about the issues of energy and the environment, Chase? What would your focus be on?
So yeah, when you talk about like, oh yeah, Biden is signaling that oil is not going to be around much longer, I would rather be the market that signals those things as opposed to government. And so my energy policies, first and foremost, I would remove all energy subsidies or look to remove all energy subsidies from every form of energy, whether it be green energy or traditional carbon-based energy, and let marketplace principles start working there. I tell you right now, there is definitely a want in the marketplace for consumers for cleaner methods of energy. So I think, and when the marketplace actually starts reacting in a free market practice, you're going to start seeing carbon fall by the wayside over time. Like, it will not be the dominant form of energy. But we need to talk about what could be the dominant form of energy if we deregulated it and made it easier to start it, would be nuclear power. Nuclear power is one of the game changers. I really find it funny when environmentalists on the left like are anti-nuclear, because nuclear power is the only means that we're going to be able to do to get off of carbon, to have a carbon neutral way to power ourselves. There's just not enough wind turbines and solar cells to produce that can do that right now with where the technology's at. And so the quickest way for us to transition away from carbon-based energy and to an actually less expensive and more productive version of energy is nuclear power. And, you know, there's always that fear of like, oh, a nuclear accident. Well, more people have died from a result of coal plant accidents or dangers in the mines. And then certainly people who've had respiratory diseases from coal died in a nuclear power accident. Nuclear is actually far safer. And so when it comes to even the safety standards, nuclear wins on that front too. And of course, we've developed certainly new technologies than the old school 1970s cooling towers that you see in popular media and that you think of, like, you know, like Homer Simpson works at the nuclear power plant. No, that's like 1970s looking stuff. We have much smaller facilities that can have much higher output if we just deregulated the marketplace and allowed that to flourish. So I believe I'm optimistic about our future when it comes to energy and when it comes to the ability to power ourselves. And that's because I see a broad marketplace and a broad consumer interest in these things. You know, Elon Musk is a billionaire, and Tesla has developed so many of these technologies because there was a market demand for it. Now, he did get a lot of government subsidies, right? But I got asked about that in my debate. And I said, you know, ultimately, when free money is in front of you as a businessman, you take it. But if that wasn't there, I just think absent those subsidies, I still think there would be a desire to develop an electric car and a desire to develop alternative methods to store and use energy. And so that marketplace would still exist. You know, it would just require Elon to put a little more of his own skin in the game as opposed to taxpayer money. And I'm sorry, you're a billionaire. You can afford that. My same policy with sports stadiums. Billionaires can afford those, not taxpayers. So deregulate the market so that nuclear energy can kind of take root and let the market do its thing. And we'll still use carbon and we'll still use oil, but ultimately the market's going to transition us away from that without the need for ham-fisted government regulations to make it happen. And of course, if that's the way we do it, it's going to be done inefficiently, more expensively. It's going to take longer. It's going to be dirtier. So let's just do it the better way.
Are you open to any ideas like of a pollution tax potentially to help, put a price on the pollution to spur the market towards some of these things?
I've heard about those ideas. I'm really weary about how much that's actually going to spur the development as opposed to just people finding out ways to cheat on the tax, and to work around it. I really think that the best action is going to be letting the free market do these things. But that being said, there is an area where property rights come into play here. If you're poisoning someone's land or poisoning the groundwater that thousands of people use, you're allowed to sue you in court. And they're allowed to seek damages for that because, you're affecting their property with what you are doing. You're effectively committing some sort of transgression against somebody. And that, again, is why we have courts to adjudicate these things. So I would say the best way to address polluters is to remove tort caps on polluters. And so that way, when they're sued, they really get hit with really large sums of settlements or damage. Encourage further businesses from doing that in the future, as opposed to slap on the wrist judgments, which we get when we have tort caps.
Okay. Leon, did you have anything before we move on to the next one, or?
No, that's fine. You can move on. That's fine.
Okay. Well, for the next one, then, this is a big issue everywhere, but especially here in California, where we are out of. And that's homelessness, and it's just crazy. Leon, could you bring up the visual on this? This is an image from. I believe it's from near Oakland, California, but I'm not sure. There's just so many places like this in California. It's sad to say that, you could mistake a lot of them for places like this. But this is just crazy. I mean, we're seeing this pop up everywhere. It's not something of just the last few years. This has been kind of cropping up over a decade or two, but at least it's sort of been building. But it just seems to be absolutely going nuts now. Here's a story from near San Francisco where there was literally a line of people living in RVs that went on for miles, and so it's not just people living in tents, but people living in their cars and lots of other places. And here's a map from HUD. It kind of shows the scale of the problem and where the problem seems to be the worst. The darker colored states tend to have the bigger problems. You can see it sort of leans to what we would consider the blue states are actually have the bigger problems with outliers like Alaska. But anyways, Chase, what would you do about this? Because this is like, boy, I tell you, you can hardly go, run a business without somebody sleeping in front of your door, I guess, nowadays.
First off, we need to approach this issue with a measure of empathy, but for the grace of God, any one of us could be on the streets and having to live without a home. And so the first thing we have to understand is that people without homes, people who are living on the streets, they're also human beings who deserve that same amount of human respect. But there's a lot of issues that go into play to why we have homelessness crises across the country. A big part of it, and I will say there's no one federal solution to these things. But let's talk about what are some of these factors. First is in some of our major urban centers, zoning issues in terms of multi-family unit living and things like they get regulated out of the marketplace. Many places, building tiny homes has been regulated out of city centers because they don't like the fact that they have these small little tiny home villages around that can provide transitional housing to get people off the streets. And so that's one of the first local issues that you can deal with is the fact that we have be single family and residential zones as opposed to being able to build those multi-family unit living. And that has to do a lot of times with NIMBYs, the not in my the people who vote blue, but then they don't want to have poor people in their neighborhood, which is because God forbid their property values go down a little bit, right? And I think that is one of the biggest issues that we have to deal with, and that's why you see in so many blue states, you see kind of this issue exacerbated with that. Another big issue is addiction. A lot of these people who are living on the streets are suffering from addiction, and it's a disease that cripples you physically and mentally from being able to rise up, and sustain yourself and live on your own terms. And the way we can address that again is a lot of that is harm reduction strategies, helping develop trust with those who are suffering from addiction by providing them the means to OD, giving them access to be able to test their drugs so that they know that they're actually using what they're using and not something that's cut with fentanyl that's going to cause them to have an overdose, and create that level of trust in those avenues to reach out. So when they are ready, not everybody's ready to like admit that they're an addict and start finding that avenue to help at the same time. But if you create those bonds of trust through mutual and direct aid, people are going to find those avenues when they're ready for it. Like I mentioned Shred the Stigma in another podcast that we did in another episode. But Shred the Stigma is a group out of Oklahoma. And what they do is they pass out Narcan and clean needles. And they say, the first time we meet these people, they're giving us a fake name and we're meeting in a city park that's not near their house. The second time they let us know their real name. Maybe by the third time we're being invited home as opposed to the park. And by the fourth time, we've developed that trust with that person so that when they say, oh my God, enough is enough, I want to get off heroin, they go, hey, that guy who brought me the clean needles is an ex-heroin addict. I bet he can help me get off of it. That kind of human empathy is how we're going to start addressing this issue. You can't just address it with legislation. You can't address it by putting hostile architecture in front of buildings and stuff and just imagining that the problem's going to go away. I think that's the biggest problem with it, is that so many people just think, we'll make it where you can't sleep on this bus bench, or we'll put some spikes under this overpass so they can't sleep here. And the problem will just magically go away. It'll just disappear. It won't. It'll just make those people's lives even more miserable. And you've just wasted taxpayer money. And so, there are better ways to address homelessness. And I think a lot of it just comes from actually seeing them as human beings and not just as like a blight or as like something you can just fundraise to create additional like state money to go to things. Like, we also need to be encouraging mutual aid through groups like churches and charities. And if we have more taxpayer money given back to us with a reduced state, more people will be able to give. We're a very giving country. And I think improve those conditions a little bit and we'll have less people living on the streets.
Chase, you touched on all the high points of homelessness, and I agree with your last set of points. But the first thing you mentioned in your answer was focusing on the fact that these small homes cannot be built and things like that. And I am not sure that homelessness is really an issue about lack of homes. I think homelessness really and truly is a problem of drugs, alcohol, and mental health. And your last part of your answer will certainly speak to that point. But I want to be clear, when you speak about the issue of not being able to build small homes and that kind of stuff and things like that, do you see the lack of homes as a major part of the problem, or is it the drugs, the alcohol, and the mental disease, which we should be trying to help these people with, which I totally agree with? Do you see that as a major part of the problem, or is the lack of homes the major part of the problem?
I mean, I think they both have a role to play. I think certainly the mental health aspect and addiction aspect is at the human level, what is causing people to remain and not be able to pull themselves out of living on the street. But I do think that in many of these cities where you have large population centers who are homeless, the homes are unaffordable. I mean, you just showed a line of cars outside Marin County. Marin, the highest per capita places to be able to purchase a home or stay. And that's because San Francisco has, very much been one of the biggest NIMBY cities in the entire country. They have, and because of this, you now have in the Tenderloin, right? You're seeing just lots of people living on the streets who otherwise, if you were to be able to have access to more housing, and like I said, transitional housing, even small that are currently being zoned out, you could create the means to transition people away. But I don't think that's the sole issue, no. And I think that ultimately the biggest issue is that human factor of people who are stuck in a cycle that's impossible to get out of, much of it due to addiction and mental health. But yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet one way or the other that's just going to solve the issue. Is the most important thing, that it's not like, oh, well, just elect me and the homeless people years. That doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I wish we could wave magic wands and fix all the problems, but in reality, it's a far more complicated issue. But I agree with you that certainly that human element of mental health and addiction is the greatest factor in terms of why people get stuck in the cycle.
Well, certainly after many decades of drug war, it doesn't seem to be doing much for us on this end as well. And speaking of wars, defense, that's another issue. We Ron Paul kind of brought this to everybody's attention when he was running for president. But, the idea, we have these bases all over the world, and it's not really looking much like defense, right? I mean, if you've got bases everywhere, at what point do you consider yourself offense, I guess? Leon, can you bring back the visual real quick here? Because that's what we're just looking at that here. And then this is a map from Al Jazeera showing all the different military bases we have all over the world, it's just we seem to be engaged in wars everywhere in the name of defense, and we're running out of ammunition. I mean, that's how much we seem to be engaging ourselves in all these things, and we seem to be doing pretty bad job of it too. I mean, we recently pulled out of Afghanistan, and not that it wouldn't have been a good idea to get out of Afghanistan, but about the most ham-handed way a government would take somebody out of a country. We had people falling off of airplanes. So I just can't even imagine, wanting this government to have more military impact around the world. Maybe we ought to be pulling back. What do you think, Chase? What about the whole defense issue and our footprint?
I got started opposing war. That's how I got started in politics. And so it's no surprise that I'm for reducing the military footprint all over the world, and thinking that we can do better with diplomacy than doing it with bombs and the barrel of a gun. Broadly speaking, I think that's the easiest area of discretionary spending that requires cuts, right, is the Pentagon. It is a huge, massive discretionary expenditure, and much of it is redundant. Much of it is graft and basically corporate welfare for the military-industrial complex. And again, I'm sorry, we can spend some less money, and if Raytheon and Boeing has to cut some jobs, I'm sorry, I'm sure those very intelligent folks who work in the weapons industry can find work doing their work in an application that require blowing up people all across the world and creating that collateral damage that drones create and that bombings create and war creates. So I feel no pity for saying that we need to reduce our corporate welfare in that area. I'm sorry about that, but I'm anti-war to the core. I think we will prosper better and be truly the leaders of the free world if we're doing that diplomatically and not at the threat of, hey, we're just going to blow you up if you don't do what we say you're going to do. I think that's going to create longer lasting, not alliances, because I hear being stuck in entangled military alliances, but it'll create better market relationships between nations if we don't cause so much violence and havoc around the world, I think. And really the purpose of a military is to defend us from invasion or attack. And I think, we can do that with a much smaller footprint than right now. I think we spend as much as like the next 9 or 10 nations combined, and like 8 of those nations are allies. So really, what are we doing here other than enriching people who, have their hands in their portfolios in the military industrial complex? So again, I won't be their favorite president, but I will certainly do my part to reduce the amount of corporate welfare they get. And
are you Chase? Are you against all wars?
Pretty much any war that does not involve us getting directly attacked. I would argue the last war that was justified was World War II, and we didn't get into it until we were directly attacked. There was already a big war going on in Europe, and we didn't go, we just need to jump right into that. We said we can help our allies by lend-lease and other things, but we don't need to commit troops until we got attacked, and then we jumped in, and then we did what America does, and we kicked ass. But before that, we didn't get involved in World War II. I think that's a better policy for us to be having, as one of non-intervention. And at the same time, I think we need to be the compassionate people around the world. Let's look at Ukraine, for example. I don't support sending tax to Ukraine, but I think if you're a private citizen, you want to put money over there, or hey, if you want to go over there and fight, go and do it. That's your prerogative, not mine. But I think not one taxpayer dollar should be going to fund it. What we should be doing is saying that any Ukrainian that wants to get out of the war zone and become a refugee, or any Russian dissident who doesn't want to be forced into the Russian military to go have to fight in Ukraine, that come here as a refugee, we'll let you in. We will be that beacon of freedom to the world. We can send a far better example about peace in the world if we just did that and made that our policy, as opposed to continuing to fund the war machine.
And I mean, I could understand your sentiments, but in the world that we live in, there's evil in the world, and I understand your position that the military footprint of the United States should be pulled back somewhat from external activities. So what do we do? I mean, the reality is there's evil in the world. What do we do about the evil in the world? Or if it don't affect us, we should do nothing? Or what exactly is your position on that?
Well, there's always going to be evil in the world. There's evil within our own country, right? We're not going to eradicate evil militarily. But when you see bad actions going around the world, you have to be you can speak loud and clear against these issues. You can condemn these issues, and you can assistance in terms of, and this doesn't have to come from our nation. It can come from the individuals in our nation who contribute to these things. But you can provide aid and support and medicine and food and all kinds of things that aren't military. Camel, and you want to spend millions of dollars, you want to buy some drones to go fight the Russians over there, I don't believe I should stop you from doing that if that's what you really want to do. I have a real problem when we take taxpayer money out of people's pockets to go fight wars that they might not agree with. It's the same reason why I oppose the draft and selective service, because I think should the United States go to war, no one should be forced to go to war for the United States if they don't want to. It's why we have a volunteer army. And I think we need to apply that same around the world. Like, yeah, if there's evil in the world, contribute to an organization that's going to fight back against that, whether maybe medicine or other goods to help the people in need. But we don't have to do that using the national security structure of the United States. Our purpose of our military is to defend our country, to defend us. And that does not require us to be the world's policeman. In fact, I think when we get involved around the world, more enemies than friends, and it creates blowback. I mean, we funded the Mujahideen to fight the Russians in the 80s. And then lo and behold, that's what became Al-Qaeda 9/11 attacks, right? So like, even when we try to do good, like the people of Afghanistan were suffering under the Russians, but by us training and helping the people who fought back against them, we ultimately created someone who 20 years down the line attacked us. So there's always that risk of blowback. I think the better policy is to be peaceful diplomats and to encourage people to come to the but that's just my, and a lot of that comes from my faith tradition, being a Christian, is that I oppose war on the moral grounds of it. I'm a true pacifist.
Yeah. Well, and it takes an awful lot of hubris too for people to be in this country and to assume they know what's right everywhere else in the world. But, one thing we do know from that debt stuff we were showing, that's the real thing we have to defend ourselves against, because that's what empires fall from, is when you corrupt yourself from the inside by just spending all of your money on empire and war. And so those numbers are just incredible. But
and I would add really quickly, oftentimes there's also no good person in the conflict. It's just two bad people fighting each other, and who are both going to oppress human beings using authoritarian government. So sometimes, we're putting our thumb on the scale, and there's like not even a good person to be supporting.
Yeah, I often feel like in some of these situations, especially for the American taxpayer, in places they may have never heard of before. And so we're firing shots into places where we're just hoping to hit a bad guy, right? I mean, this is this is scary stuff, and those bullets collectively have all of our names on them. As far as the responsibility of those things going at other people. So I just terrible. But anyways, we are just about out of time. We were going to talk about immigration, but we did that on the other show we did with Chase, so we're not going to touch that. Real quick, I guess we'll touch on the gun thing since we're right. This is a good segue from defense. So Leon, could you bring up the graphic real quick? So mass shootings, sadly, it seems to be a thing. And this is just a chart from Statista showing the numbers sort of growing over time. It's not like huge numbers, but they're still, it is sort of a disturbing trend. And of course we had several mass shootings this year that got a lot of attention. But on the flip side of the coin too, we have the government putting their thumb on the scale, trying to hide data about how guns can be used to help people in their own defense. And in this particular story, the CDC had a story about good guys with guns actually doing some good out there, and the CDC then got some heat and they scrubbed the report from their site, and that's one thing we kind of hold near and dear to our side. Our show is we have a segment when Tim is on called "Good Guys with Guns" regularly, so it kind of hits home with us. But anyways, what do you think about this, Chase? If President Chase comes in, I assume most people can kind of assume what probably the libertarian answer is, but let's hear it from you. What do you think the right policy is with respect to guns?
Well, I am pro Second Amendment, pro gun rights, to no surprise, right? Like you said, that's pretty standard for a libertarian. But let's explain why I've come to that position. I come to that position by living my life and understanding that there have been times in my life when I would need to defend myself, and police would be too far away to make that difference. I used to work in a bar late at night. I'd be getting out at 2 or 3 in the morning with hundreds of dollars of cash chips in my pocket. And you know what else I had in my pocket? A means to defend myself. So if someone tried to mug me, because you know what? When it comes down to it, the police would not get there fast enough to defend me. And the same thing when it comes to my safety, right? I say as an LGBT American, I said this on my debate with Warnock, armed gays are harder to oppress and they're harder to bash. It's harder to gay bash a guy who's got a pistol on him, right? And I sincerely of shootings like we've seen in Pulse in Orlando, Club Q in Colorado Springs. It's better for us to have a means to defend ourselves. 49 souls were lost at Pulse. How many less people would have died had one person been armed and securing the property to make sure that those patrons are safe, right? There's a possibility we could have saved a lot of people's lives. And so I am, without a doubt, going to be the most to a presidential candidate if I'm our nominee, certainly amongst the Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians. And ultimately, because I see red flag laws as a violation of due process. I see things like trying to make braces illegal or suppressors illegal. Well, that just hurts the people who are most vulnerable. If you make a pistol brace illegal on a rifle, you're just making it where those who are smaller aren't able to use it. And that means your wife, that means your handicapped neighbor, that means somebody who is going to have a size disadvantage. And when it comes to things like suppressors, you're just asking for people to have more hearing damage. Suppressors aren't lie people tell. So yeah, I love me some guns. I love the ability for us to defend ourselves. And it comes to me from a moral position that we have the moral right to defend ourselves. And you're right, mass shootings have occurred, and that is a tragedy. But I don't think it's because we have guns. We've always had guns in our society. We've always been a very what has changed are two things. One is the amount of psychotropic drugs that have been used to treat mental illness when maybe there's other alternatives. And many of the side effects of these drugs are increased tendencies towards violence or self-harm. So we need to be talking about that because a lot of gun violence is actually suicide too. And then the other big part of it is the fact that we have empathy in this world. And that's because much of it is due to the nature of social media, that you can just jump onto a Twitter account and you can spill bile out into the world and you can insult people all behind an avatar, say things you would never say to a person in face to face, and it makes you feel powerful. It's like a drug to some people. And it's that lack of empathy that has caused us to dehumanize people and cause the propensity for mass violence. That's why many of these people who commit mass violence are lonely souls on the internet who find people to hate, and then they go and commit violent acts against them. And that's really where the issue is. It's not the fact that we own guns to defend ourselves. My mom went to high school, and they had a shooting club where kids would come to school with their rifles bagged, throw it in the locker, and then afterwards they would go target shoot. And never once was there a school shooting. So it's the question isn't guns. And then the final thing about mass shootings is how easy it is to create soft targets. When you don't have anybody who's there who's able to be armed and guarding the property, you create a soft target for these shooters. And that's the biggest problem with our schools. That's why you see these school shootings, is because we've made it too easy for people to prey on our young people. Nobody goes and commits a mass shooting at a courthouse because they're armed to the teeth, and there's metal detectors, and there's all kinds of means to protect people there. Why can't our schools be the same way?
Yeah. And that's a good point with the courthouse, because certainly a better motive to go there than to a school, you would think, as far as, Yeah. So, thanks so much. Leon, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to throw in on that last?
No, I think Chase is absolutely right. I mean, it's really and truly is not guns are the issue. It's the evil people behind the guns. That's a problem, and we have to do something about that. Whether it's because of the drugs that they're taking and creating also the mental disorders for them, whatever it is, but it's not the guns. It's not access to guns. It's the evil people behind those guns what's creating the problem. So I agree. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chase, for coming here and sharing your thoughts on what you think the country needs, what policies you think would work best. I think this has really helped people, and I hope people will, find this and be able to become better informed about what solutions might work out there, because we certainly are a country in need of solutions. Did you have any final thoughts? Pulling up Chase's page. Can you pull up his page real quickly? I've got his page just so people can go find that again. There we go. And that's votechaseoliver.com. Chase, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to leave the audience with?
Thoughts is please check out the website, become a supporter if you like what you see. And ultimately, I'm seeking to be a contrast to the two-party system in our presidential election. And if you're a libertarian who likes to see that contrast, who likes to see a bold, principled vision for the liberty movement moving forward, please become a supporter and check me out as I travel across the country. Say hello. I love meeting people as I campaign.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chase, for joining us, and thank you out there for watching. And until the next one, stay tuned and stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.